Hey, some people are asking me about the Mexico gas station scam that we experienced last week on my family vacation. I'll make this as brief as possible. So I had heard about these before we left for Mexico, and what I didn't realize, I kind of heard about how they work, but what I really didn't realize was that like these things happen at the biggest, most professional gas stations that are like right on the side of the highway. It would be, I live in Massachusetts, but it'd be like the equivalent of like driving down the Mass Pike. And then all of a sudden, off to your right, you see like a big mobile station with like a giant mart. It looks very clean. It looks like the place you would go if you were worried about like, I don't want to get scammed. I don't want to go anywhere shady or anything like that. Like, let me go to this one because like maybe it's a little bit more expensive, but like it looks legit. So I go to that one. I pull in. The first weird thing was as I was about to pull into like one of the pumps, the gas station employees, the attendants, I guess everything's full serve down there. If it's not, at least this one was. Or maybe it's not even full serve. Anyway, he was like, no, come over here. He basically had me pull like all the way to like the last pump. And I was like, okay, Jessie, my wife, she was like, hey, I'm going to run in and get some snacks. I was like, cool. I had my son, Dean, and my uncle Mark were with me as well. And one thing I had read was like when you go get gas in Mexico, it's like just get out of the car, like make sure that like the pump is at zero. Like sometimes they'll start the pump apparently at a higher number and then charge you up from there. So you're actually like paying more money and getting less gas. So I got out of the car and he was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, yeah, can we fill it? And my whole thought here was like, just fill it now. We're getting pretty close to the end of the trip. And then that way, like with the amount of driving I think we have, I got the rental car like with half a tank of gas. They only needed me to return it with half a tank of gas. So I was like, I probably won't burn more than half. Let's just like fill it up. It's cool. So they fill it and then they're like, how do you want to pay? And I was like, I saw the number and now I think about it, I'm not entirely sure that it did start at zero because it was the number was like more pesos than I thought it was going to be. It was like 975 pesos. So I was like, oh, I don't have that many pesos on me. And I was like, I guess I'll use a card. I wasn't using a debit card the whole trip for fraud protection reasons. And so I gave him my credit card, which had been working everywhere. Like every last little bodega, every like little last thing we did, everybody took my card. There was never a problem. So he runs it, and as he's like running it, this other dude comes over, another gas station attendant. And if you kind of think of it this way, like if he's pumping my gas over here, like this guy's over here. And so every time he's got my card, I don't know if I mentioned this, but he like went 3 pumps away and grabbed this different card reader. And the weird thing was like right where my car was, the card reader wasn't in the actual gas pump. And I saw what looked to be like kind of an older card reader, but one that would be probably appropriately aged for a gas station on this shelf, but they weren't using that one. They went and got a different one and it was like matte black. And I later found out it's made by this company called Clip. And so they run my card and right as he's running it, the distraction guy is like, oh, like, where are you from? Do you speak English? I assume they're asking me if I speak English because they wanted to know, like, if I could understand them, if they needed to communicate. And I said, like, un poquito, whatever, but, like, I don't really. And so, like, he's distracting me, and I can kind of tell I've traveled enough where I'm like, I think I know what's going on right now, so I'm feeling a little unnerved. And so I'm trying not to talk to him very clearly, but he keeps, like, kind of pulling my attention and being a little bit aggressive about it. So I'm trying to watch the guy with the card reader. And so he goes like, hey, like your card was declined. All right. This is the thing that's crazy. And the thing that I thought was like really deceptive that made me keep running my card. And it's actually kind of brilliant. Unfortunately, these right here, I'll see if I can put them up front so you can kind of see them. So those are the receipts that they would give me. As you can see, there's a bunch of them. And those receipts, what he was essentially doing is running my card for $1,000. I found out later, even though the gas was like, $50-$60, running for $1,000. He's trying to see what like the upper limit of my card will be, right? So he starts around there And then he prints out an old receipt. So like these receipts, this is the messed up part, is because it's in Spanish. You just see the word like declined in big letters and you're like, oh man. And he'll show you the terminal too. And it'll have like an X on it. And you're like, oh, but they know you don't really read Spanish and it's all happening very, very quickly. And so I'm like, oh, and he's like, I don't know, it didn't work. And so I was like, that's weird. It's been working all over. And I assumed that it didn't work because this receipt says declined. Well, this receipt was actually from 45 minutes before I arrived at the gas station. And I only figured that out because when I got home and I was thinking about this and I looked at these, I realized that what they were doing is they were running my card, testing the limit, then getting distracted. And then the first guy would kind of turn like this and he would print an old receipt that said declined. I'm sure they just ran like random numbers or something, right? Like before they get there. And maybe they do it like in between cars or in between scams. So it's always like pretty current. And I actually read online, this has happened to a lot of other people. And what they'll do is they'll be like, oh, sorry. Like, yeah, it's from today. Like our machine's being weird and the time is messed up or something, but it didn't work. I assume that's what they would have said. So then they're like, do you want to run it again? And I have this, right? So I'm like, I guess it didn't work. And I was like, well, what's the harm? So they run it again. They run it for 2,000. And all of these amounts are like a little bit over. So it's a little bit over 1,000, a little bit over 2,000. And then I was like, that's weird. And he's like, do you have another card? Like, I don't know. And the key thing here is that they definitely pump your gas first. And now you're sort of surrounded. There's 2 or 3 different guys around me and they're all kind of looking at you like, hey man, like you got to pay for your gas. Little do you know how much you're paying for your gas, right? So I'm like, I guess so. So I grab another card. They run that one for just over $2,000. And I'm like, hey, I did have more cards, but at this point I'm like, this is super weird. There's no reason that second card would get declined as well. And they just keep handing me these receipts like, yes, here's your proof, which is so sinister. So then my uncle, and mind you, like my son, my 6-year-old kid is like sitting there and it's just soulless, right? They're just robbing this family, this like my adorable son and just like whatever, like just they don't care. It's brutal. And then so my uncle's like, here, just use mine, right? We run his card, right? Turns out they ran him for over $1,000. Same thing, declined. And I was like, well, I don't have to tell you guys. I was like, here's the amount of pesos I have on me at the moment. And then I've got US dollars too. And all of a sudden they were like really cool with being like, yeah, no, that's fine. And so we did a split payment between US and pesos, which outside of the airport in Mexico, I hadn't seen anyone else do that. So I found that to be like really suspicious to begin with. All right. So anyway, I paid for the gas. I go in the mart, and this is when I realized like this whole thing is organized crime. Like this whole thing, everyone's in on it. So I go in. Oh, and while I was out there, while everything was happening, I was like, can I just try your terminals that are inside, like the Go Mart as it's called? It's like a big, pretty robust, nice looking mart. And they're like, nah, you can't pay inside. I was like, since when? Like that's super weird, you know? Anyway, so I finish, I go in and I just like, I'm with Jesse and we're like, oh, let's grab some snacks. And I honestly just really wanted to see if I could use my card in there because I was just like, this is just weird. So we grabbed like some seltzers and stuff and went to use the card. And the guy, like they clearly take cards, like everywhere takes cards. The guy goes, I pulled that card out and he's just a kid. And he won't look me in the eyes. And he's just like, no cards, no cards. And I'm like, what? So then I think Jessie had some pesos on her and it wasn't very much. So we were able to just barely skate by, pay for the seltzers. And I'm like, just feeling real weird about it. So get back in the car. We drive up the road, no more than like 2 minutes up the road. I don't know if we didn't have cell service or if this is just how long it took for all my fraud alerts to kick in. My phone starts blowing up with fraud alerts and my bank is calling me and this whole thing. And luckily my particular banks like caught this stuff and it was good, but they tried to run me up for over $5,000 and they ran my uncle up for over $1,000. I think his bank caught it too, but I've read reviews online where people are just like, yeah, like I think someone said they had Capital One and they're like, yeah, they got me for $700 and Capital One just said like, you know, sorry. It's unnerving, right? Like when you get scammed, especially when you thought you were kind of taking precautions and you're just in this like, I don't know how to put it other than like, it looked like the exact place at least coming as from an American, where you wouldn't get scammed. So that's all I got on. But that's how gas station scams at least can work in Mexico.